June 7, 1944, near Saint-Lô, Normandy, Senior Judge Klaus Müller of the 709th Infantry Division observed with utter astonishment the continuous stream of American automobiles advancing inland from Utah Beach. In a mere 2 hours, he had meticulously tallied 117 identical military scouting cars, each appearing as pristine as if it had just emerged from a manufacturing facility. What Mueller witnessed that early morning was not merely an incursion, but an industrial marvel that would completely dismantle every preconception the Wehrmacht held regarding combat. These machines, which the Americans referred to as jeeps, had traversed the Atlantic Ocean by the thousands, and their sheer volume revealed a stark reality far more devastating than any artillery bombardment. Germany was not confronting an army, but an entire industrial apparatus that had refashioned warfare into a process of mass assembly. The jeeps had commenced their arrival with the initial wave of landings, driven directly from landing ship tanks that had navigated the English Channel in an unbroken succession of convoys. Each LST was capable of transporting up to 30 fully assembled jeeps, and hundreds of these vessels were offloading their cargo onto the Norman coastline. The vehicles bore the insignia of either the Willis Overland Motor Company of Toledo, Ohio, or the Ford Motor Company of Dearborn, Michigan. Their official identification read, Truck 1/4 ton, 4x4 Command Reconnaissance. But to the German combatants observing their cascade onto French territory, they signified something infinitely more foreboding, evidence of an industrial capability that defied all comprehension. Captain Vera Linderman, commanding the 3rd Company of the 919th Grenadier Regiment, documented in his post-action evaluation dated June 9, 1944, "The adversary possesses vehicles in quantities we typically reserve for ordnance. Every American formation, down to the squad echelon, appears to be equipped with motorized transport. We neutralized 12 of their scouting vehicles yesterday. This morning, I count 40 in the same vicinity. They treat sophisticated military hardware with the same casualness we afford rifle cartridges, as expendable items to be utilized and discarded without consideration." The production figures for American jeeps would have utterly astounded German military strategists had they been privy to them. Between 1941 and 1945, American factories manufactured in excess of 640,000 jeeps. At the zenith of production, Willis Overland and Ford were completing a single unit every 90 seconds on their assembly lines. This singular vehicle type constituted 1/4 of all American military motor transport output. The Germans, who had managed to produce scarcely 50,000 Kubelwagen equivalents throughout the entire conflict, could not fathom such magnitudes. What rendered this production triumph feasible was a degree of standardization that surpassed anything within German military experience. Every Jeep, irrespective of whether it was manufactured by Willis or Ford, utilized entirely interchangeable components. A gearbox from a disabled Ford GPW could be fitted into a Willis MB in mere minutes. Wheels, engines, axles, and even minor elements such as spark plugs and fan belts were identical across all production runs. This standardization extended to the logistical framework, where replacement parts were strategically positioned based on statistical projections of failure rates, ensuring that remedial components were invariably accessible. Sergeant Hans Rieck of the 716th Static Infantry Division, observing American movements from a concealed vantage point near Carrington, recorded in his personal journal, "The Americans do not undertake repairs on their equipment. They simply substitute defective components with new ones from an inexhaustible supply. I observed a damaged vehicle restored to operational status in under an hour. The engine itself was not repaired, but entirely exchanged, unbolted and lifted out with a fresh engine installed as casually as one would swap a flat tire. Our mechanics would require a full week to execute such a procedure." The Americans accomplished it in a field, under intermittent artillery fire, all while smoking cigarettes. The German military mindset, steeped in the tradition of preserving and meticulously maintaining every piece of equipment, struggled to grasp the American methodology. Within the Wehrmacht, a vehicle was allocated to a unit and rigorously tracked throughout its operational lifespan. The loss of a vehicle due to negligence was grounds for a court-martial. Mechanical complications were diagnosed with exacting precision. Parts were painstakingly repaired or fabricated when replacements were unobtainable. The Kubelwagen, Germany's counterpart to the Jeep, necessitated factory-trained technicians for any substantial servicing. The Americans operated under fundamentally distinct principles. They had calculated that a Jeep's combat survivability was approximately 90 days and planned accordingly. Rather than investing in elaborate repair infrastructure, they simply produced replacements in volumes that exceeded any conceivable rate of attrition. When a Jeep sustained damage beyond immediate rectification, it was stripped of usable parts and abandoned. A new vehicle would arrive within hours or days, delivered via the ceaseless convoys that linked the beaches to the advancing front lines. Lieutenant Colonel Otto von Schroeder, Chief of Staff of the 352nd Infantry Division, captured the German bewilderment in a letter to his wife. The Americans wage a war of the affluent. They expend vehicles with the same profligacy we exhibit with ammunition. Yesterday, I witnessed a Jeep strike a mine. The occupants emerged unharmed, transferred their gear to another vehicle that appeared within minutes, and resumed their mission. The destroyed Jeep was shunted to the roadside and forgotten. In our army, such a loss would necessitate reports, inquiries, and weeks of effort to procure a substitute. By June 10th, American forces had landed over 12,000 vehicles in Normandy, with Jeeps constituting the most substantial single category. These machines fundamentally altered the battlefield in ways German doctrine had not foreseen. American reconnaissance units penetrated German lines with unparalleled alacrity and adaptability. Artillery forward observers, utilizing Jeeps, could relocate with remarkable speed, rendering counter-battery fire nearly infeasible. Supply echelons maintained uninterrupted contact with advancing elements, eliminating the lulls for consolidation that German commanders had anticipated exploiting. The Jeep's capabilities amplified German challenges. With its four-wheel drive and light construction, it could traverse terrain that German planners had deemed impassable for motor vehicles. The Norman bocage country, characterized by its sunken lanes and dense hedgerows, should have channeled American vehicles into lethal ambushes. Instead, Jeeps simply navigated across fields, over embankments, and around obstructions. They forged their own network of routes, independent of the established pathways that German forces had prepared for defense. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding a battle group of the 21st Panzer Division, wrote after the war, "The Jeep endowed every American unit with the mobility that we only achieved with our elite mechanized formations. A single vehicle could transport a machine gun team, a mortar squad, communications equipment, or provisions. They materialized everywhere, in locations we considered secure, delivering firepower or coordinating artillery strikes with their radios. We were unable to establish a cohesive front because the Americans simply drove around our positions. The maintenance and logistical support systems underpinning these vehicles proved equally overwhelming. American logistical units had prepared for operations on an industrial scale. Vessels arrived daily, bearing not only fuel and munitions, but entire vehicles, spare engines, gearboxes, and pre-assembled component kits. Mobile repair workshops advanced immediately behind combat formations, capable of executing any repair or replacement. If a unit lost 10 Jeeps in combat, 10 replacements would materialize within 48 hours, frequently sooner. Major Hinrich Zimmermann of the 12th SS Panzer Division observed, "The American logistical system functions like an assembly line extended to the combat zone. Everything is standardized, packaged, and delivered punctually. They have eliminated the inherent friction of warfare that Clausewitz described. While we struggle to maintain our existing material,
They simply order replacements as if from a catalog. The psychological impact on German troops became evident within days of the invasion. Soldiers who had been assured that Americans were soft and reliant on material comforts discovered an adversary possessing material wealth beyond imagination. The sight of interminable columns of identical jeeps, each one brand new and fully equipped, demoralized troops who were meticulously preserving vehicles that had been in service since the Polish campaign. General-Leutnant Wolfgang Paul, a mechanic with the 21st Panzer Division, examined captured jeeps and reported, "Every component is engineered for mass production and facile replacement. The engine is uncomplicated but functional. The transmission is robust rather than refined. Nothing is polished or precisely fitted, yet everything performs reliably. They have sacrificed aesthetic elegance for sheer quantity, and quantity is prevailing in the war." The racial integration observable in American motor pools particularly disconcerted German observers indoctrinated with Nazi ideology.
African American soldiers operated jeeps, maintained them, and supervised motor pools. This challenged fundamental Nazi tenets regarding racial hierarchy and military efficacy. Feldwebel Kurt Wagner noted with perplexity, "Negro soldiers operate and repair these vehicles with the same proficiency as white soldiers. Our racial theory suggests this should be impossible, yet the evidence is irrefutable." American modifications to their jeeps demonstrated a flexibility that German military culture could not accommodate. Within days of landing, units were welding additional armor plating, installing wire cutters to thwart German concertina wire obstacles, mounting multiple machine guns, and adapting vehicles for specialized functions. Medical units converted jeeps into makeshift ambulances by installing stretcher racks. Signal units outfitted them with extensive radio equipment. Engineers mounted mine detectors. Each adaptation was crude by German standards, but immediately effective. The contrast with German equipment became increasingly pronounced as the campaign advanced. The Wehrmacht's vehicles necessitated specific fuel grades, specialized spare parts, and extensively trained mechanics. Many German units continued to rely on horse-drawn transport, with a single division requiring thousands of horses that consumed tons of fodder daily. The horses were vulnerable to artillery fire, demanded constant attention, and restricted mobility to walking pace. Witnessing American units advance at 30 miles per hour in vehicles requiring only gasoline and rudimentary maintenance was profoundly discouraging. By June 15th, German intelligence estimated that American forces in Normandy possessed over 4,000 jeeps, with hundreds more arriving daily. This figure seemed inconceivable to officers who recalled the entire German army invading Poland with fewer than 3,000 motor vehicles of all types. The production statistics of American manufacturing suggested that the United States could sustain the loss of every vehicle in Normandy and replace them entirely within 2 weeks. Colonel Ernst Wagner of the Panzer Division compiled a report that reached Field Marshal Rommel shortly before his incapacitation. "We confront an adversary who has industrialized warfare to a degree we never deemed possible. They mass-produce military vehicles using the same methods employed for civilian automobiles. Every American soldier appears proficient in driving and performing basic maintenance. Their entire society is mobilized for mechanical warfare in a manner we have never achieved. The disparity in production philosophy proved unbridgeable. German vehicles, such as the Kübelwagen, were meticulously engineered, carefully constructed, and designed for extended service life. But Germany could produce only a few dozen per day at peak output. American jeeps were simple, crude by German standards, but flowed from assembly lines at rates Germany could not match with all its factories combined. Where German industry pursued perfection, American industry sought adequacy multiplied by overwhelming volume. General Major Fritz Bayerlein, commander of the Panzer Lehr Division, offered a stark assessment. "We are engaged in the preceding war while the Americans are fighting the next one. We refine individual vehicles while they perfect the system that manufactures vehicles."
We train specialized technicians while they design vehicles that any soldier can maintain. We are artisans battling an assembly line, and the assembly line is prevailing. The redundancy inherent in American systems frustrated German tactical planning. Destroying a bridge to halt American supply convoys proved futile when engineers appeared with portable bridging equipment carried on jeeps. Ambushing reconnaissance patrols yielded little when identical replacement vehicles and crews materialized within hours. Mining roads merely prompted Americans to drive through fields. Every German tactical success was negated by American material abundance. The Jeep evolved into a symbol of this abundance, transcending its military function. German soldiers reported observing Jeeps utilized for tasks that would have been unthinkable in the Wehrmacht: delivering mail, transporting journalists, conveying chaplains to forward positions, even hauling generals' personal baggage. At a casual application of military equipment for convenience rather than necessity demonstrated a level of affluence that German soldiers, accustomed to scarcity and meticulous preservation, found both astonishing and disheartening. Lieutenant Friedrich Hoffmann wrote to his family, "The Americans employ their vehicles as we use bicycles, for everything and without concern for wear. I witnessed a Jeep being used to deliver hot meals to a single outpost, a journey that strained the engine and consumed fuel for the comfort of 3 men. In our army, those men would have walked and consumed cold rations. This extravagance should represent a weakness, but when one can indulge in waste without consequence, it transforms into a form of strength." The technological chasm manifested in unexpected ways. American Jeeps arrived equipped with standardized toolkits, comprehensive maintenance manuals printed on waterproof paper, and spare parts packages meticulously calculated through statistical analysis.
Deutsche Fahrzeuge oft lackten basische Tools, relied auf Mechaniksintuition, Rande an Dokumentation und kontendierten für skarse Sperrparts durch eine konvolute Requisitionssystem, das konnte Wochen. Als Juni transitierte in Juli, deutsche Forzen fanden sich immer inkapabler, von amerikanischer Mobilität kompetieren. Statische Defensiv-Emplacements wurden outflanked durch Jeep-mountete Reconnaissance Units. Artilleriepositionen wurden überrannt bei rapide avancierendem motorisierter Infanterie. Supply Lines wurden severed durch swift-moving Patrouillen, die erpielten hinter German Lines, strückten und verschwarten, bevor Reserven reagieren konnten. Der Battlefield hatte bekommen Fluid, in Weisen das faverte die Seite, besitzend unlimitiertes motorisiertes Transport. Major Wilhelm von Thoma, observierend amerikanische Breakout-Präparationen in Late July, ruht: "Die haben erzielt, was wir glaubten unmöglich, die komplette Motorisierung einer Armee. 11 jeder Soldat kann transportiert werden. 11 jeder Kanon kann gezogen auf Highway Speeds. 11 jeder Supply-Item kann direkt zu dem End-User werden." We are fighting a 19th century war against a 20th century adversary. The German High Command's attempts to counter American motorization proved fruitless. Directives to target vehicle concentrations were meaningless when vehicles were ubiquitous. Efforts to interdict supply lines failed when every unit possessed organic transportation. Strategies to exploit American reliance on fuel were nullified by a logistical network that delivered gasoline in quantities Germany had not witnessed since 1940. By the advent of Operation Cobra in late July, American forces in Normandy possessed over 15,000 vehicles, with Jeeps constituting the single largest category. The German assessment, compiled from prisoner interrogations and aerial reconnaissance, suggested that the Americans could sustain 50% vehicle attrition and still remain more motorized than any German division at full strength. This calculation, when communicated to Berlin, was dismissed as defeatist. In reality, it was conservative. The impact of American motorization extended beyond immediate battlefield consequences. German officers who survived the war would carry these lessons into the reconstruction of post-war Germany. The American model of standardization, mass production, und design simplicity would profoundly influence German industrial development. The Volkswagen, which had failed as the Kübelwagen to rival the Jeep in wartime, would achieve success as the Beetle in peacetime, adopting the mass production principles the Americans had demonstrated so devastatingly. Feldwebel Otto Schulz, who spent 3 years as a prisoner of war in America, later reflected, "In Normandy, we learned that modern warfare was not about valor or skill, but about industrial capacity. The Americans demonstrated that victory belonged to whoever could produce the most, ship the fastest, and replace losses instantaneously. The Jeep was not merely a vehicle, but an emblem of a new form of combat we were ill prepared to face." The encounter of German troops with American mass motorization in Normandy represents mehr als eine militärische Disparität. It was a collision between two distinct civilizational approaches to warfare. The Germans, with their heritage of professional military excellence and meticulously maintained equipment, met an American military that had transformed warfare into an exercise in industrial management and mass production. Ultimately, the endless columns of jeeps that surged across Normandy signified something more profound than military transports. They were the tangible embodiment of the arsenal of democracy, proof that American industrial might could be projected across oceans and delivered to battlefields in volumes that rendered traditional military calculations obsolete. For German soldiers observing those columns advance, each jeep was a messenger bearing the same stark truth. The era of artisanal warfare had concluded, and the age of industrial warfare had dawned. The final word belongs to Hauptmann Ernst Bergmann, who observed American operations throughout the Normandy campaign and survived to become an automotive engineer in post-war Germany. The Americans taught us that in modern conflict, the factory holds greater importance than the battlefield. Their jeeps, arriving in limitless numbers, each identical and replaceable, revealed to us that warfare had transformed into a branch of industry. We believed ourselves to be soldiers. They demonstrated that we were merely laborers in a factory of annihilation, and their factory was infinitely vaster and more efficient than ours.